So I'd say over the several years that I've been doing user experience and product design around that ballpark, a number of my friends and colleagues, they've they've done a lot of things within UX, but a number of them have really diverged away from it. Some are no longer UX designers, some went on to being product managers, and some went off to do something that's completely independent of UX. But one thing's for sure is that the process, the education, and the approach of UX has really affected them. It helps them know how to do more things, not because it gives them a new process. UX itself it's a soft skill. I think a number of people try to make hard skills out of it, but ultimately the soft skills that you pick up from it, oftentimes which are attributed to product managers, the process, it lends itself to critical thinking and ultimately the critical thinking of the self. And this episode I'm going to cover how UX has affected people, in particular why it affects people in a very significant way in which they start to capture their own dreams, whether it's within the industry itself, but oftentimes it's away from the industry. So I have friends and colleagues who, when they became UX designers, they thought they're just going to go all into it. They'll do their job, they'll do the work. Some who became product managers, ultimately, a number of them went off to do their own thing. Now, the type of things I'm talking about is some decided to go into make their own private label for a fashion brand. Some decided to go ahead and make a production firm of their own. And some went ahead to travel the world on some soul-searching journey. Not because it transforms you necessarily, but it makes you confront yourself at some point. The system itself, the process, helps you self-reflect. Do I want to keep doing what I'm doing, and why am I doing it? And one thing that I'd like to touch on before I continue is a quote by Sinek. Very few people or companies can clearly articulate why they do what they do. But why, by why I mean your purpose, cause, or belief. Why does your company exist? Why do you get out of bed every morning? And why should anyone care? And that's a great point. And it's one of the things that you first encounter when you learn user experience, especially if you take a boot camp. Now, a number of people that get into user experience are self-taught. And there was a statistic, a research gathered by, so I had to look it up real quick, but the report by UXPin for 2017 to 2018 shows that most, like about 65.38% of all those surveyed, I mean, most of them are self-taught. It's just a growing number are getting their degrees in UX through a 4-year university, and just overall formal education, more so than boot camps. Actually, about a few years prior to that, most of the education for UX came from boot camps, and many still are looking to get into UX from boot camps itself, but most of them are self-taught. Knowing your why matters. And now the reason why I bring up knowing your why is because it does ask us to empathize, to talk to users, to talk to the consumers, to talk to the people that you're developing the product for. And this is something that product managers are often advocated to thinking, and ultimately the entire stakeholders, the founders, the CEOs, the people who have a stake in why this product that you're designing for actually exists. And oftentimes, this caring for users, for the consumers, for the target demographic, comes into conflict with money because a number of people strive and drive towards the money. And that ultimately comes at the expense of the end user. Are the stakeholders embracing the user narrative, or are they just saying, oh, that's fine, we'll put it into like another version, another build, but ultimately we have other priorities and we can't have the user drive the development and the features of this product. And then you'll have a conflict, because at some point you ask yourself, wow, these narratives, these voices, the stories that these users are coming forward with, what they love, what they don't like, it's not being heard. And you're supposed to be championing, you're supposed to be mediating these perspectives, these angles, and people may not care. And so it starts to affect you. And in the end, when you're juggling between where the stakeholders, where the founders, where their visions are going versus what you've gathered with your research, you start to feel for that. You start to feel for those people. And then you start to weigh in, do I just do this job for the paycheck, or do I really care? UX by default lends itself to empathizing to users. It doesn't mean that you should always, go with where the users are going, because maybe there's a better angle to this, but there is a dark side to UX. There is a side to UX where you will take all that information, but bend the user's perspectives to the ends where, the stakeholders want. Like, let's say, for instance, in the gaming industry, EA Electronic Arts will hire specifically a designer that understands how users think and manipulate it to pull money from them, like a microtransaction or something. This is called dark UX, which I'll get into maybe at some point. But when you use user experience to manipulate, you're no longer serving the interest of the user, more so than the perspective of the business. This is something that you kind of weigh towards in product design, because you're starting to incorporate business decisions into your design work, but I wouldn't say that it's always in the service of users, and you have to be very cognizant, you have to be very aware of the ethics of the situation. And, and then that's why you need to ask those questions. You need to do research, you need to talk to people. You really need to get their perspective, and don't be afraid of getting other people's perspectives. If you don't have an interest in learning other people's stories, if you don't want to learn something new, if you don't have the growth mindset to learn, then UX may not work for you, because UX is not designed to where you should think in a single funnel. UX is designed to where you have multiple narratives, where you have a second opinion, and it lends itself to being forgiving of yourself that you could be wrong. You should be very willing to be wrong, because it's not like you're going to fail. You're only going to fail if all you're sticking to is the singular narrative, if you're the single voice. It could be your own voice, it could be the stakeholder's voice. These are challenges that you have to consider, and it asks you to self-reflect, to know your worth, to know the worth of others. And without that learning perspective, without that growth perspective, you may not be as effective with UX, and you may end up having the same challenges as to why you wanted to go into UX in the first place. When you take all those things into consideration, when you weigh in the ethics, when you weigh in your personal experiences, the growth mindset, it really does transform how you approach UX. What is your specialty? What do you like about it? Do you still want to do user experience, or have you found yourself somehow through this entire process of understanding, empathizing, and developing for users, that you ultimately want to do something else? And these are the revelations that you run into in UX. Now, these are my gatherings and experiences. I'd like to hear your feedback on UX being dedicated to self-worth and clarity in the comments below. Join me next time for more explorations in systems and culture. For Hourglass, I'm JB.